Welcome to the stage, the director of the Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide at United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Naomi Kikoler.
This morning, when many of us woke up, we did not have to worry if we would be allowed to enter a school, go vote, be arrested, face sexual violence, be murdered. That's not true, sadly, for many people around the world today. That's not true for the Hazara who wake up each morning wondering what their future holds, for the Uyghurs who find themselves in detention for no reason other than their identity, for the Rohingya community who continue, over 1 million, to live in refugee camps in Bangladesh, and who continue to hope that the US government will recognize the genocide that was committed against them. Almost 80 years after the Holocaust, we shouldn't have to be here talking about the commission of genocide. We should not be here talking about the types of horrors that my grandparents experienced. But sadly we are, because we're here as people of conscience, and we're motivated by the words that our founder at the museum, Elie Wiesel, said. Let us remember what hurts the victims most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystanders. We're here because we are not bystanders. We're here because we recognize three core things. One, that genocide is a preventable crime, that through early warning and early action, we can help save lives. We recognize that by talking about the risks that religious and ethnic minorities face, we're not making a political statement, we're talking about the unique vulnerabilities that these communities face. We recognize that preventing genocide is not a boutique issue, that respecting the international religious rights of communities is not a niche issue, it's a core national security issue. Second, we also know that when we are confronted with the warning signs, when we're confronted with the crimes that are happening, we must act. That we have an array of tools, from non-coercive to coercive tools, that can help save lives. And it's not just the morally right thing to do. It is the right thing to do for so many reasons that our guests and panelists will be talking about today. Finally, we know, as people here gathered as a community of conscience, that we cannot give up. The victims and survivors are counting on us to help elevate their voices. As one of our patrons at the museum, Ben Ferenz, the last living survivor of the Nuremberg trials, has said over and over again, never, never, never give up. We have seen in the past few years cases against Nazi perpetrators close to 80 years after the commission of the genocide. For those who have experienced genocide in recent years, for those who will unfortunately, should we fail, face genocide in the future, we must stand with them for decades to come to ensure that their perpetrators are held responsible. We must stand with them to ensure that they are protected, that those who've been displaced in Iraq, the Yazidis, the Christians, the Shabak, the Sabi and Mandaeans, can have a future where they are allowed to thrive and are not the victims of genocide again. On my last trip abroad before the COVID crisis, I flew to northern Iraq and to Bangladesh for the museum to meet with survivors of genocide. And what was so harrowing was that in both places, the calls that they had were the same. They called for justice, they called to not be forgotten, they called to have their experiences recognized, and they called for their basic human dignity to be recognized and respected. It's an honor to be able to join you today on behalf of the museum. I hope that as we continue to open, we will be able to welcome you all into the institution. We appreciate the commitment that you all have made to protecting religious minorities. And it is humbling to acknowledge that as I stand here today, we have now opened an exhibit at the museum on the genocide against the Rohingya. May we hopefully in future years and decades to come not have to do that. May genocide be something of the past. With that, it is my profound honor to introduce Mark Green, Ambassador Mark Green is the president of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. I would also like to introduce Adlay Kejjan, the executive director of the Yazidi American Women's Organization. And I'd like to invite former Congressman Frank Wolf up to the stage as well. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to take this opportunity to pick up on a theme that Frank touched on around what the administration can do to help prevent genocide, but also assist those who are the victims and survivors of such crimes. And Ambassador Green, you had a very unique portfolio and vantage point when you were running USAID. And you're also responsible for creating a pretty remarkable program, which was the Genocide Recovery and Persecution Response Initiative. It's responsible for allocating almost, to date, $400 million to help religious minorities in northern Iraq. A number of the changes that you also implemented within USAID have resulted in this administration also being able to allocate funds to help the Rohingya community. Can you talk a little bit about why you launched that initiative?
Well, first, it's an honor to be here, an honor to be with my co-panelists, and thank you, Naomi, for the great work that you do. And it's always good to be with Frank Wolf, who is the conscience, I think, of religious freedom. He was in Congress and continues to be. So you were very kind in describing the work that we tried to do. What we wanted to do was to provide a framework, and it began with a trip, in fact, that Frank and I took 3 years ago to northern Iraq, where we had seen the victims of genocide, forced from their home, forced to flee, and quite frankly, those who were left behind were in such small numbers, we were facing the extinction of entire communities in that part of the world. And so we saw a couple of things that were important to do. But in terms of reasoning, first off, in taking on ISIS extremists, the only way that you can be said to have defeated them is to try to restore some of what they stole. And religious liberty is what they stole in that part of the world. They forcibly destroyed communities, places of worship, and entire communities, and so we felt that was a priority to take on. Also because notions of religious liberty are who we are as Americans, right? This is part of what's in our very fiber. And at USAID, we believe it's not only an American value, but it's a universal value, and therefore it needs to be part of American leadership. It is a way that we show what we stand for. You know, these days I hear a lot of people talking about how we have to counter China. And sure, and that's important, but we also have to contrast with China. We have to show what it is that we stand for, because that is powerful. That is how you reach out around the world and show the contrast and show the difference between what China and some others seek to impose and what it is that we bring. And then finally, I viewed helping to restore religious liberty and pluralism as a vaccine against authoritarianism. And so that's why it's important, not just in northern Iraq, but in so many corners of the world. You note that authoritarians, tyrants, dictators, what's the first thing that they do? They almost always go after communities of faith because they're scared to death of freedom of conscience. They're scared to death when people are able to express their relationship with their Creator. That is contrary to everything that they stand for. So we also felt it was a key part of that. And then finally, in trying to do sound development work in a place like northern Iraq, the only way that you can help to restore opportunity and hope and viability in those communities is to unlock the power of faith-based organizations. Those organizations work with people who have been left behind and so easily forgotten. When we work through them and some of those faith leaders, we're able to reach into corners, forgotten corners, And again, that's part of our mission in trying to restore some hope.
Thank you, Ambassador Green. Adlay, you run an organization that's dedicated to helping Yazidi women, exactly the type of local organizations that are doing work on the ground that Ambassador Green was working to try to empower. Can you talk a little bit about how the Yazidi community has regarded the U.S. response to the Commission of Genocide, and what are some of the needs that you are experiencing now?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, and I'm honored to be here. I want to say, as a Yazidi woman, and I think I speak for all the Yazidis around the world, when on August 3rd, ISIS attacked, we all thought, talking to our family, when they went to Mountain Sinjars, and there were hundreds of thousands of Yazidis stranded on Mountain Sinjars, they would call us. And we were like, don't worry, help is on the way, the world won't stand by, let terrorists take over, kill you guys. Day 1 passed, absolutely no response, nothing. Day 2 passed, nothing. Day 3 passed, we started receiving photos and videos from our families and friends with children dying of hunger and thirst, elderly dying of that scorching heat on top of Mount Sinjar. And then next day, silent. Their phone had died, and we didn't know if they were alive or dead. Come to August 9th, all Yazidis around the world, we started demonstrating in our cities, contacting our representatives, pleading for help, begging for help to save our family. And finally, on August 9th, the US initiated the first airstrike against ISIS so they don't ascend the mountain and kill the people stranded there. The response there, it was very disappointing that it didn't come enough. But didn't stop there. They were still stranded. Hundreds of thousands of Yazidis in that scorching heat without food and water. Thanks to the Syrian Kurdish fighters, they came and broke through ISIS lines and opened the safe corridors where hundreds of thousands of Yazidis descended the mountain into Syria after being starved for almost 9 days, into Syria, walking 12 miles in that heat, back into Kurdistan, into safe region. Next came Kocho village. It's another Yazidi village in south of Sinjar. You might know of that village because of Nadia Murad. It was under siege by ISIS until August 15. And again, we pleaded with State Department and throughout the whole world, all the Yazidis, to help them. Nothing was done. August 15, ISIS separated the men and the boys that reached puberty from the women over 45 years of age, took them, killed them, put them in 17 mass graves, and took the rest of the girls, along with Nadia Murad, to be sold as sex slaves. In January of 2016, I went and visited that site where other woman and her mom were buried, and the skeletons were all out there. Nothing was done at that. And then we knew where hundreds of Yazidi women and children were held in schools, still in Iraq, an ISIS-held area. And we pleaded with State Department and other governments around the world, the only thing we need from you guys is to provide air cover where Yazidi fighters will go to free the woman. We just need air cover so they can safely get to the mountain. Nothing was done. From there on, ISIS loaded all the Yazidi women and children into buses, took them into Syria to be sold as sex slaves. Over 6,000 Yazidi women and children were held captive during that week and taken as sex slaves. There's still over 2,900 still unaccounted for. Only about 3,550 have returned. The response on this August 3rd, it will be 7 years. And let me tell you, help for Yazidis came late. And even when it came, until today, it's very little. Over half of our population in Iraq, until this day, is still suffering in these tents and displaced IDP tents in Iraq and in Syria. Only about 120,000 have actually returned to Sinjar, our own homeland. We have 81 mass graves and other sites where ISIS killed Yazidi people and entire families. Out of those, only 17 have exhumed, and those are the ones in Nadia Murad's village. And I think it's because of her, plea to find rest for her family. But we still have almost 70 mass graves with entire families unaccounted for. For us to get peace as the Yazidis, we need to put our loved ones to rest. We need to do our burial rituals and find rest for our loved ones. Nothing is being done.
Thank you, Adlay.
Over 68 areas of our shrines and religious sites desecrated. Nothing has been done. Today, to add all this to it, the KRG, Kurdish Regional Government, put a blockade on Sinjar to prevent aid from reaching the Yazidis that are stranded in the mountain. I, along with other people from Yazda organization, were the first people to take aid in 2016, January of 2016, to the people that were stranded on the mountain. When we went from the families and areas that people were taking shelter in the mountain, we found survivors there, survivors that just got raped, escaped ISIS, and there's no help available to them still in their clothes that they got raped in.
Adlay, thank you so much, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure that we can pick up on some of the themes that you talked about what needs to happen now and how to protect communities that remain at risk. Maybe just two rapid-fire questions. One, Frank, if you don't mind talking about what can Congress do today? You've got a group of people here who are ready to engage. What can they be calling for? And then finally, Ambassador Green, what was some of the most, when you think of your role in it as administrator, what was some of the hardest things you had to grapple with?
Well, I want to give credit to Vice President Pence for changing the policy, and I want to give credit to Mark. Mark Green went places, and I know where he went. He literally changed the policy. They were given all through the UN. The Yazidis were getting nothing from the UN. The Christians were getting nothing. And so Mark Green literally almost saved Christianity in the cradle of Christendom. And I think, and my request, if there's anybody from the current administration or for Samantha Power's office, talk to Mark and find out what they did, because it was working. Before that, it was just not working. One thing I think you could do, you could have a genocide caucus on Capitol Hill, bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, bicameral, House and Senate, to almost be the warning system, the place, because right now genocide is taking place in Nigeria. Who's responsible? If everyone's responsible, no one is responsible. I think to have a genocide caucus, Republican, Democrat, and I think the Speaker would be sympathetic. The Speaker was very sympathetic in establishing the Tom Lantos Commission, but a bipartisan caucus funded that could be the early warning system, and people could have interns working there, but we need a genocide caucus.
Thank you so much for that, Frank. And it would provide a focal point for individuals like Adlay, who in the moment had to try to reach out to state. It gives them a key partner in Congress to be able to reach out to. Giving the final word to you, Ambassador Green.
Sure. So what's the toughest thing that I saw? In addition to what we saw in northern Iraq, I had in one of my first trips an opportunity to travel to central Rakhine State in Burma. I visited essentially a prison camp, captive Rohingya. And I remember meeting a family and talking to a father. All of his kids had been born in that camp. They had never left the camp during their lifetime. And he looked at me and he said, look, we don't have any teachers, so my kids can't get an education. We don't have an imam, so we're not able to worship. The only food that we have is the food that you give us. And he looked at me and he said, what do I tell my son? I got nothing. No answer to that. Flip side. So in Jordan, we saw wonderful organizations like Caritas helping refugees as they were onward to find new lives. I saw them being trained in such things as the art of mosaics. I encourage all of you in the Ronald Reagan building, in the main lobby of USAID, there is a wonderful mosaic tile that has the USAID logo from the American people, and that was done by these refugees with their new skills as a sign of appreciation. One of the most meaningful things I think we could possibly do is to support that kind of work. I also had dinner at a pizzeria with refugees who were being taught the fine art of pizza making. And I am either a glutton or an aficionado of pizza, and it wasn't bad. That was one of the highlights, and it shows what we can do when we work with faith leaders and we are responsive to the cries for help.
Thank you so much for that. I want to thank all the panelists. I'd like you to encourage you to learn more about Adlay's organization. She also mentioned the Nadia Murad Initiative, Yazda. There are other Yazidi organizations, the Free Yazidi Foundation, to understand more the acute needs that that community and other communities in northern Iraq face. And as has been mentioned, to draw attention to the ongoing plight of the Rohingya community. And I hope you all can heed the advice from Congressman Wolf around the important need to mobilize Congress and create a standing caucus for genocide prevention. Thank you, and thank you to Ambassador Brownback, Force of Nature for Good, on all of these issues, and to everyone involved in organizing the summit. Thank you.